why I ended up drinking a litre of vodka a night. And I was literally self-medicating. And when I gave up, I realised there was a whole new world out there, a whole new life.
You were abandoned by probably the most important person on earth.
And I felt so alone.
It's a very vulnerable place that you're in. Tell me, what's the future hold for you?
Well, it's the doors are open wide, you see, and that's when you stop drinking, you fling them open.
So, Dave, or Sober Dave, welcome to the podcast. So delighted to have you on it.
So it's a real pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for asking.
Of course, a 3-hour drive, and you've brought the sun from East Midlands. That's
Obviously.
lovely.
It's beautiful here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, obviously, I know about your story. I've looked at your social channels and what you stand for. And it's just amazing. But tell me, what made you want to go in and help in such a way? I've seen the grey area drinking, the help you do on addiction. I'd just love to hear a bit more about it.
I think the reason for that was when I stopped drinking, it was after 40 years of, I would say, heavy drinking from the off. I had periods in between where I didn't drink that much. I was heavily into sport in my 20s, played a good level of football, always had a tennis racket, golf clubs, whatever it was I played. But when I stopped drinking, I realised the power of sharing my story with people. And I don't know what it was, but I had something, whether it was because I'm a lad from Croydon with tattoos and I say it how it is, I'm honest, and that I seem to attract people to come and ask me questions,
Yes.
And then I realised that by giving back some of the knowledge I picked up and how I stopped drinking began to help them, which in turn helped me.
Of course.
So it's a complete round robin.
Yeah, fantastic. And so you've mentioned 40 years of drinking from the off.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
What happened?
I had a pretty quiet childhood, actually. Okay. We didn't have a lot of money. But we had good dinners, Mum would always knock up a good Sunday roast and put the Carpenters on the record deck back then.
Okay.
And, but I appreciated things. But when I was 14, my mum left the family home and she didn't say goodbye. She left a letter for me. And at 14 years old, that's a tough pill to swallow, Yeah. And it really knocked me. And then shortly after that, my dad met someone.
Okay.
And then I felt really, really alone, rejected. And there was a group of lads at school that I kept away from, but they kind of lured me into their nest.
Yeah.
And I was never a fighter. But I realised shortly after that, I was a drinker because we used to ask the adults outside the off licence, we had a bit of loose change, can you get us a can of Fosters and whatever? And I became the drinker in the group, and then I realised it gave me confidence, it gave me a sense of purpose, and I belong somewhere, and that's where really it began. And then, over the years, I began to rely on it, which we can talk about later on.
Yeah, of course. I mean, as you say, it seems like quite a big shift. You're in a family dynamic, and then it wasn't expected at all, your mum leaving?
I mean, I was 14, so, I was into my own thing there, and I knew they used to argue and stuff, but I think it came as a surprise to my dad. And then, for 3-4 months after that, I saw him coming from work and he just aged 10 years. It really upset me. It hurt me. And I didn't know where my mum was. And, for his mum to leave him, it was a real shock to the system. And I found that by drinking, that numbed some of the pain. So I was just a baby. It's young to start drinking. I remember one day I drank a bottle of martini and I was so ill that night but the next day I just went to school. Going to school with a hangover at 14, it's when I look back, I feel real sadness for that 14-year-old lad,
Yeah. like struggling to even hear it, if I'm honest, because I mean, what a shock system, as you know, at 14, we're developing, we're kind of becoming the man, you know, we are going to be. And I always say, whenever we get trauma, there's like 3 ways we can respond. Yeah. We can fight, we can flight, run away, or we can freeze.
Yeah.
And I think the people who freeze, they numb.
Yeah.
And they numb by doing something because the pain, they don't know how to cope with the pain.
Yeah. And that's exactly what it was. And the thing then, I didn't develop emotionally either. Because I was sort of stopping my emotional development there by keep numbing out, and I was doing it all the time. Yeah. And back in the day then, you could go into pubs without ID.
Okay.
You could just walk in. Right. And I was a bit of a lump then, you know, like I looked older and my mates looked older and we would just go in and order pints and that. And after 3 or 4, we were drunk back then. But we grew up really quickly as this mob. Yeah. You know, it was a mob of lads and playing football and being out till 2 a.m, but still having to go to school with bunking off a lot. And, you know, it changed everything overnight. You know, I went from being a really quiet, insular lad into being a little bit of a Herbert, really, within a few weeks.
Yeah, I can understand it was how you coped, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a coping thing.
Yeah, and so just give me some context. So how much are you drinking? Are you drinking weekends, every day?
I was drinking mainly weekends then, the odd one in the week. And we got in with the older people as well, the locals in the pub, and they were encouraging it, you know, come on, boy, I'll get you a beer and whatever. So it was never mad, but it was enough for my age. Yeah. You know, any alcohol at that age is bad, well, at any age. But, it you know, for me to constantly get drunk at the weekends.
Yeah, 14.
And it's the development of the brain as well, isn't it? It's that. And it was everything. It was just my physical health was suffering and my mental health was suffering because I knew my mum had left. I didn't know where she was. She hadn't contacted me. So there was this array of emotions going around, and it was almost like I was in a bit of a daze for a long time. Yeah.
How do you cope? It's for me, I actually don't know the answer.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
So unexpected. So you're here, you're 14, your mum's just left without any notice. You've got a letter. Can I ask, what did the letter say?
Oh, well, it said, hi, David, I'm leaving your dad. Things haven't worked out. I'll be in touch in the future. It was that. And to be honest, I'm kind of making up a bit because it was so long ago. I can't remember the exact wording, but it was along the lines of that. So when I received that, I didn't know it was going to happen, but 2, I didn't know when I would see her again, if I was going to ever see her again. You know, so 1 minute we're having the Sunday roast with the Carpenters playing and, you know, nice family sort of setup. And then next she's gone, my dad's in pieces, and I've got in with this crowd. Yeah. And then, of course, there was my dad didn't know what I was doing because I've gone off the rails. So it was a complete whirlwind of stuff that literally happened within 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, I can get it. And when did you next speak to her?
About a year later.
A whole year?
Yeah.
Yeah, no one would expect that after reading that letter.
No. And in those days, we didn't have mobile, so it was never like, oh, I got a text from your mum. It was a letter. And I agreed to meet her, and I can't even remember what that first meeting was like. But, it affected the rest of my life, to be honest. And my mum passed away 4 years ago now, and I was with her when she died. And it was an emotional time because I'd held a lot of stuff over my life. Resentment. I wouldn't say hatred, but confusion. And we never really talked about it, but I held her hand at the end. And I knew she was slipping away. And I said, Mum, I love you. You're the best mum I could have had. And she died. But the reason I said it was because I felt her leaving had made me the man I was now.
Yes.
Because I've got incredible resilience. I've had to learn to be self-sufficient. So in the long run, I feel like it's done me a favour. Do you know what I mean? But at the time, it was just awful.
Yeah. Knowing a little bit of your history, I completely agree. The resilience is clear, and not just resilience, inspirational resilience. I can tell that you inspire a lot of people. You are approachable. You say things in a way people understand, and I'm delighted for you that you had that moment where you have the understanding that it actually was a helpful thing, not a helpful thing. That flies around at just the right time. Now, for me, I mean, it's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And so I'm just going to go back to, we're now 14. You love sport. I can imagine, I can see you now. You're like a healthy, big guy. I bet you were great at sport. I bet you could drink and mask it extremely well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like if I drink, you'll see me in the morning and like, what happened to you?
Yeah.
But I reckon, I can imagine that you were always very fit and healthy.
Yeah.
So just take me through the next few years. So you're numbing, you're drinking, but obviously at that time, you're just coping and doing the best you can. What then happened?
I think age was on my side with that. So I used to work hard, play hard. I could go out till 4 a.m, come in absolutely plastered and get up for work at 6:30 and do a full day's work and then crack on in the pub, But I think when I got into my early 30s, I had a separation with my son's mum. He was young. He was 2 years old. She didn't drink. And it kind of came between us then, because I although I'd grown up really quickly when I was young, I also felt like some of my childhood was stunted. So when George was born when I was 30, and I'm not sure I was completely ready for fatherhood, right? So when he was 2, I was 32, we separated. And I was always a member down the local pub, and I'd already got my nickname Glugs because I could chuck them down. Like I could drink 6-7 pints an hour, no problem. So it began to change where it wasn't so much a social thing. It was going into this Young's pub back then, an old man's pub full of different characters, all best mates, but we weren't really. We were drinking buddies. But then what I started to do was drink indoors. And that is where it changed, because there was an offie over the road. I'd go in there and get, back in the day, this strong cider called Diamond White.
I know it, unfortunately.
Yeah. I would get 4 of them.
Okay.
But then gradually it was I'd get 8 of them. And then gradually I wouldn't even go in the offie because I felt judged. So I'll get them from the supermarket. So I'd have my stint in the pub. I would reduce my drinking in the pub because I didn't want people to think I had a problem, knowing that I would go home to get absolutely bladdered, right? So I would go in there, have 4 or 5, right, lads, see you tomorrow, blah, blah, and then go home and then open up the cider and quite often just pass out, blackout, or be a keyboard warrior where the chemicals from the cider would make me react in such a way that I felt frustrated or aggressive or something hadn't said the right thing, so I'd start on the old texting, and then wake up 3 o'clock in the morning full of anxiety, sweating, looking at, oh my God, what have I done here? And what came from that was fully drinking at home, because I didn't even go to the pub in the end. So it manifested from being really sociable to then semi-sociable to then I was a solitary drinker. And that then I had 10 years of solitary drinking. And then the levels ramped up because I wasn't accountable to anyone. No one could say, Dave, mate, you seem to be drinking a little bit too much now. You need to rein it in. No one, because I was doing it on my own.
Yeah. As you said, you were masking it anyway initially, and that was, you said, around 32 years old, and you'd gone through this relational difficulty. You've got your son who's 2 at the time, and then it ramps up at home. Why do you think, this all happened? So if we stop here at this moment, we look back from 14, you're now, let's say, 34, so you've got this space of 20 years where you've gone from getting into a crowd that's drinking at the age of 14, you're drinking on the weekends, it's then, I can see step by step in that direction, ramping up to now it's home, drinking consistently, even less social. Why do you think that happened?
I think when I was masking out feelings from what happened to me, but I had several failed relationships as well, off the back of my drinking. I had an unfortunate occurrence when I was in my early 20s. I got married really young, not to my son's mum, to someone else, and she had an affair, and I caught them. That set me off on a spiral. So it was my mum's left me, my wife's had an affair, and it was quite cumulative there.
Yeah, of course.
I masked that by drinking, believing to myself I was enjoying myself, sod it, let's go out and get drunk. But the more my life went on, the more things started to happen to me. Like, I made lots of bad decisions off the back of my drinking. Although I was functioning, I was going to work, but it was really affecting my productivity. I was suffering financially because of the cost of it. And it was all accumulative, plus the fact I was becoming more and more dependent on this coping mechanism called alcohol. I was relying on it more and more on a daily basis, where during my mid-30s, I couldn't even envisage going a day without a drink. It was part of my tapestry of life of work hard, go to the pub. If I wasn't going to the pub, go home. First thing I would do is open up a cider, a Stella, or whatever. And it became ingrained, like eating. It was just like, well, it's dinner time, it's drink time, and I become dependent on it.
Yeah. It's interesting just chatting to you. We're looking at like addiction. We're looking at addiction as a coping strategy. It's obvious in those 20 years, let's say, you were just feeling a huge amount of pain. That's what's clear. One of the things I heard that I've always found quite inspiring is, and I love your name, Sober Dave. So this is not to take away from the Sober Dave, but the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And I've always found that so powerful, because to chase sobriety can be so difficult. It can be like a to-do. And I've always found it difficult with to-dos when I don't do them. I just am filled with shame. But actually, when you look at connection, and this is why I think you're so successful, because when I watched you, I felt like I knew you. I've watched you just, prepping for this. I thought you were so warm. I thought you were so lovely. I would open up to you, and I take time to open up. And I think part of that is you naturally are searching for connection anyway. And I think, when I look at what happened to you at 14, and then why you got in with these lads, is you were searching for connection, I think.
And I also think my journey of my drinking went from being incredibly social to incredibly reclusive, right? So I felt completely isolated in my drinking because I didn't think anyone would understand it, where I got to, why I ended up drinking a litre of vodka a night. And I was literally self-medicating every single day, right? And I didn't know who to turn to. And I remember when I eventually made the choice to stop drinking, I went to a sobriety event in East London, and I panicked. I didn't want to go in. Went all the way there, and I was standing outside. Then I walk up the road. Then I walk back. Eventually, I plucked up courage to go in, and it was packed in there, absolutely packed. And there were speakers there, and there was one place on the sofa, and I was like Mr. Bean walking in, and I plonked down on the sofa, and this bloke's drink went up in the air. I made the right entrance, right? But afterwards, I spoke to certain people there who were already sober, and it was like a warm glow for me that God, there are people out here doing this, you know. And I remember getting on the train, and it was full of drunk people, and I was sober, and this was 3 or 4 weeks into my sobriety, and I felt part of something then. And that's why I recognise how important connection is, because you're lonely enough when you've got a problem with drinking. You are so lonely because of the shame and the stigma that you can't even tell your best friend half the time, you know, because they say you haven't got a problem, you're all right. But only you know how bad your drinking is, because we hide it. It's like when you go to the doctors, they double it straight away, you know, like, but for a lot of us, it's worse than that, right? So we keep it in. So when you meet like-minded people that can really share their story with you or listen to you and understand where you've been, it really does open up your feelings, you know. And it's like a whole new world. The way I describe it is like you've had blinkers on and you're looking at the floor constantly, like down. You're always looking down in life, right? And all of a sudden you take your blinkers off and you look up, and there's the sky, there's the sun, there's a cloud, you know. And I don't want to make it sound woo-woo, but it does open up so much in your life.
I can imagine. So there's a saying that, and I read this saying, I thought actually it was good for here. The saying is, only the true self can be creative. Only the true self can be real. And I wanted to add to actually, only the true self can bear the risk of deep intimacy. And the reason I think that's so important is when you feel shame and you're drinking and you're hiding it, you're not being your true self. You've embraced your story, and a lot of your story is really about making the wrong choices for a lot of your life. Yet you embrace it without the shame that others, or the stigma others try to put it on, and go, look, it took me ages to get out, but I got out, and this is how I did it. And if I can help you, great. You know, if my story helped, because I think the power of story is always so true and always so transformative for people. I think stories can do that. But it's about being vulnerable to be your true self.
Yeah.
And I think that's so powerful, because shame will make us hide, and shame will make us put all masks on. And we all, to some degree, have masks. But the more vulnerable and open we are, the less we can manage our emotions. And we did talk about managing emotions. And I think you have to be your true self to be able to manage emotions. If you hide, it's very, very difficult.
Yeah. And let's face it, right? I had a mask on for 40 years. And I role played in several different situations as well. Yeah. You know, I was an actor.
Being a master of it, I suppose.
Yeah, I was a master. I was a seasoned actor that I could go into any situation and I could play the part they wanted me to play, because I was a people pleaser as well. Yeah, because people pleasing made me feel good about myself. You know, I've made them laugh. I've made them happy. I must be of some value. Rather than the piece of crap that I thought I was for my whole life, you know. So when you remove that, you have to sit with the true authentic self, right? And for most people, they don't know who the hell that is. So for me, it was like going back to that 14-year-old boy holding that letter, opening it, and it's like the power of like revisiting that inner child is so incredible. But I have to caveat it by saying I couldn't do that in the beginning.
No,
it was too much for me. You know, like I had to concentrate on not drinking half a day at a time.
The present initially, and then for healing, you stay in the present, but you strategically revisit the past.
I wasn't emotionally ready for it. You know, it was like coming out of prison, and everything was different when I stopped drinking. You know, it was like, whoa, what do I do? Do I commit a crime so I can go back into my institutionalized state, or do I just sit with this for a while and go day by day by day, which I did? And you know, it was hard. There's no illusion over it. It was really, really hard. The first night, I was absolutely desperate for a drink, but I sat with it. I kept busy. I went to bed at 7 o'clock, woke up, and then the next day was a new day. So I dealt with it that way. And it's like a house of cards. You just gradually build them up and up and up until one day you think, do you know what? I don't want to kick them over now, because that I'm this far. You know, and then comes the authenticity and sharing your experiences and how you've done it and how you feel. And even now, I did a post at the weekend about how vulnerable I felt emotionally at the moment. You know, you have to work constantly. It doesn't go away. It's a forever thing. But it's what you learn about yourself is incredible.
Well, I think you've done the work. I think you've looked in and you've gone to the present, to the past. I mean, you mentioned going back. I mean, part of, I think, one of the reasons it was so difficult for you is, I mean, even when I hear you talk about it, I actually feel pain, you know, because it's, you know, it's a very difficult story. And that pain, you know, when I was, you know, hearing you talk about it, you were almost at 14 years old, which is one of your most formative ages. You were abandoned by probably the most important person on earth.
Yeah.
That must have defined you, and the pain of that must have just been excruciating.
It was. And I remember when my dad met his new partner, there was a moment then that the central heating had packed up and they were sitting downstairs with a gas fire on, and I could hear them laughing, and I was in my little box room listening to the laughter a few weeks even after my mum had left, and I felt so alone. So I went downstairs and there was huffing and puffing by his new partner, and I said, "What's wrong?" And I looked at my dad for validation, and he just looked away and walked into the kitchen. And I remember leaving the house and bawling, literally bawling, like it felt like a lifetime of tears coming out. And that changed something for me then. It was almost like I'm on my own now.
Yeah.
And I wasn't emotionally secure then. Like I'd never grown up in a family environment where we were, "I love you, Dave. I'm so proud of you." There was none of that. It was a practical childhood where they would make sure I was clothed, second-hand clothes, but that was okay. A good meal, a holiday in Cornwall once a year in a tent or a caravan. But there was never emotional security. So when that happened to me, I didn't know how to manage my feelings. And I think that's when this crowd realised what had happened, and they put their big arms around me. "Come on, boy, we'll look after you." And that's what led me down that road. But I survived because
that's the
of
main
that.
thing. Yeah. I mean, it's normal, actually, if you think about it. You were looking for a home. You were looking for acceptance. You were looking for people to add value because you'd lost that foundation in your life. And if a group of people then go, "Yes, put an arm around you," it's a very vulnerable place that you're in. And the point is, you needed something then.
I didn't care what it was. It was, I was clutching onto anything, you know. And we had some great times. I mean, it allowed me to be streetwise as well. You know, I grew up in quite a rough area, and I learnt a few tricks and that. And I'm glad it happened in a way, because I think I've turned out all right. But it's been a rough ride. That's all.
Yeah. I think it's a very inspirational ride. I know. I'm only getting part of how rough and how difficult it was. So we've kind of gone back through, we've gone 20 years. I know it went on for 40 years. We've been in this place where you had what was really probably one of the worst things that could ever happen. It's not just the loss of your mother, but it's kind of like the rejection, abandonment all at one. You know, she's somewhere where, why doesn't she want to speak to me? And this whole plethora of caring around that, which is deeply going to impact your intimacy pathway and emotional development, as you mentioned. You then, rather than address it, you numb it, which pretty much I think anyone would have done. And the way you numbed it and the way it happened was through drinking. So you've then, you know, gone through difficult relationships, which one can understand. I mean, I think the pathway of what happened there, I mean, we've all had difficult relationships, me, myself, and, you know, you're trying to find what's normal relationship in this earth when you've had the loss of a significant one. So you've then gone to, you said your mid-30s, you're drinking every day, you're masking. Take me a step further. Did it get better from then, or did it get worse?
It got much worse.
Okay.
I realised that I was going through a cycle of meeting women, attaching to them. Once they fell in love with me, I would reject them. And I realised now that it's because I didn't want to be dumped first.
Yes, right.
You know, So I needed the validation that I was okay, I was lovable. And once they loved me, like, bye, you know. And then I realised I can't do that anymore, you know. And I moved, actually, when I was 40, away from this pub. And I remember knowing it would be the last time I walked in there. I just knew it, right? And when I walked in, it was a typical, hello, Dave, mate, how you doing, son? And I knew when I walked out, they would say, prick. You know, like, it was that kind. I saw through it by then. I saw through it. And when I moved to this house, it was a little cottage in the middle of, not middle of nowhere, but it was out enough. So I then started bringing drink indoors and become more and more solitary in my behaviour. I would isolate myself. I would lock myself in. So, for example, on a Friday, I would always finish at work early. I work for myself, so I plan it. 3 o'clock, go shopping, big trolley, everything for the weekend. I wouldn't come out till Monday morning. And I would go through 3 litres of vodka, a box of wine, case of beers. You know, like, I would go mad for that period and literally crawl out on a Monday morning to start again, knowing I would get drunk that night, you know. I lost connection with everyone. My neighbours were always having parties. They asked me along, and I would say, I'm not coming, I'm out. And I would sit there in the dark behind the sofa with my bottle of vodka, because I thought, if I go to the party, people are going to watch me drink, know how much I'm drinking, so I'd rather sitting on my own in the dark, you know. So I didn't have relationships. I put on weight. It was just a spiral downhill, further and further and further. That I like to say, emotional well-being was at a rock bottom. My health was shocking. I mean, everything had gone south, you know, like blood pressure, cholesterol. I was on antidepressants, the whole caboodle. You know, I lost all my confidence. I wouldn't answer the phone. I wouldn't go to work. So going from someone who loved to laugh and whatever, it went into someone that was really hooked into the addiction of alcohol. You know, it was shocking.
And you know, the way you say it, it kind of makes sense. The steps, it's just the steps in the wrong direction, wasn't it? Where you're drinking more at the pub, but then you're losing connection there. You're then drinking more at home. You then know you're drinking too much, and you sound very skilled, actually. And so you're so skilled, you know, if I go out, people will see. And so you're gifted, and so you're gifted at hiding, you're gifted at masking. It's interesting because there's a concept called life traps, and abandonment's a life trap. And it always says someone who's been abandoned or feel they've been abandoned, what happens is they feel like their self-worth was hit, especially if it was done at a young age. And they take from it that I can't be loved. So then they go into a new relationship wanting to be loved. They then get loved, and then they feel a fear that they cannot describe. Do you know why? They don't want to lose that love. And so what they do is they self-sabotage the love before they lose it. So it's actually this negative cycle that actually makes you feel abandoned all over again, which then would lead to more drinking naturally, because that's how you numb. And I think that's probably what was happening to you. And it's funny, people judge that person going, he can't commit, or look how awful he was to that woman. Look, she loved him. But they don't unpick enough to go, this was a maladaptive coping strategy. This was the way of you surviving. I think at that time, accepting real love, until you'd look back, was almost impossible for you, really.
100%. The way you describe that is spot on, the self-sabotaging. And until I began to look within myself at my own self-esteem, self-worth, that would have gone on forever. And the drinking obviously just spiraled that, so it was a double whammy, you know. And it was only till when I stopped, I had to strip everything back completely to shell and start again. It was almost like learning to walk again, you know. And I've got that mind. I'm really like I love to explore. I'm curious about a million things. So I start to explore who am I actually? And as I said before, all the childhood stuff, I had to pack it away in the loft and think, right, it's there to be looked at, but not now. But like the basic stuff, like, can I love myself? Can I accept myself, appreciate myself, who I am? Well, I start to explore that. And I realised I was, you know, I was a good man. And that kind of, with the stopping drinking, sped that process up. You know, it's like, I am okay, and I am beginning to help people, and people are coming to me for, I hate to say advice, but guidance maybe. You know, guidance of, how have you done it? How can I do it? And sometimes it's just listening. You know, you don't have to give answers. You can just listen to someone.
Absolutely.
And then they unlock their own thing. But it felt like a lifetime of imprisonment in my own torture that I created myself. And I was just pouring petrol on the fire all the time, you know. And it took me until I was 54 to stop. And there would be a lot of people, especially men, I would say that would go, do you know what, I've been drinking all my life, there was a point, blah, blah. And I think that's my niche as well. As I always say to people, it doesn't matter how old you are, think about the next 5 years ahead. What quality of life do you want?
Absolutely.
You know, when I was drinking, the doctor took my blood pressure and he said, to be fair, you could drop down any minute. It was terrible. My cholesterol was sky high. As I said before, antidepressants. I had acid reflux that was so bad that I would projectile vomit acid out the blue anywhere. It would just come out, right? I was 20 stones. However, that is in kg. That shows my age. But I was really, my visceral fat was at a higher level, dangerous level, you know. And all these things are off the back of drinking, poor food choices, bad decisions, anxiety. You know, it just, there was nothing ever good about it.
Yeah. It's funny, I mean, if I'm honest, I'm quite emotionally touched by the whole story, and I can see the drink had impacted you just in your health, from everything, as you say, from your organs, probably to your skin, to your mental well-being. But the powerfulness of the story that I just heard from you was actually quite unique, and I'll tell you why I'm touched. From what I see, and if you can allow me just to say what I see, and if it's wrong, please tell me. You had a 14-year-old who was in a family, was happy, as happiness can be, and then had a huge trauma event that led to massive pain. And from what I see through the next few years, it's someone going, I'm not worthy of love, looking for love, but starting with the foundation of I'm not worthy for love, and looking for love, trying to search for it, and then numbing when can't find love, can't find connection, can't find the meaning to someone's life. And what you said that's so interesting is that 14-year-old boy is now 40s in the future, 54, and has then said, I am loved because I love myself. And then that foundation of looking around the whole world, looking down every pint, looking down every vodka, cider, diamond white, has come to the place where you've looked inside yourself and you found that love, self-love, that's then giving you the foundation to overcome your addiction. I think that's, I just love that. And I can see how it's affecting the whole body, but I just love that as a psychological journey. So, well, I mean, that's amazing.
I thank you for that. And it didn't even start with self-love. It started with because I hated myself. I couldn't look in the mirror. I couldn't even walk past a shop and see a reflection because it was someone else to me, which was like my addiction. It was like alter ego, you know. I knew I was an emotionally intelligent person inside, but I also had this huge elephant in the room that I couldn't get rid of every single day. You know, we all heard the story when you wake up in the morning hungover and you're like, I'm not drinking tonight. I'm not drinking all week. Sod that. But by lunchtime, you start to feel better again. By 2 o'clock, you're like, I might have one. And then you're off buying the same amount you bought yesterday, and it's the hamster wheel again. The only thing I would say maybe that's slightly different to what you said that I've realised since stopping drinking as well is I realised that because mum and dad didn't tell me they loved me or they were proud of me, I think I felt quite lonely growing up as well, because we all love a hug.
Yeah,
we all love to be told you're something to be proud of. So I think it started before that, you know. So there was a lot of work for me to do to validate to myself that I am lovable. I am someone to be proud of. I'm proud of myself, you know. But by removing one thing out of your life, which is what it is, can open up so much, like, for the future. And I quite often say, there used to be a film with, I think it was Adam Sandler, called Click, and you had the remote control and you could he wound his life up. And I say, imagine yourself in 5 years. Yeah. Who do you want to be? Where do you want to be? What do you want your health to look like? You know, wind it forward. And that's what I did when I stopped drinking. I imagined myself in 3 months' time. Yeah. And that did the trick for me. You know, it's like 3 months out of 40 years isn't a lot to ask for, right? Yeah. So give yourself that at least, you know. And I say to people, try a week. Sometimes try a day just to see how it feels. Journal, write things down, experience life without it, and then see where it takes you. You don't have to say you're giving up forever, but you got to start somewhere, right? Yeah. So, and that could be just making those small changes to try and get it out of your life, basically.
I mean, what you're talking about is the awareness, isn't it? I think you probably knew you had a problem most of your life, but you then got this awareness that this is not how I want to live.
It was like my mum died 3 months before I gave up, and I had an experience, and it wasn't a dream, and it wasn't reality. It was an out-of-body experience, and I was walking through an old mansion house, like a really big old house, lost. I didn't know where, what, a big wooden panelled walls and that. And I walked through this door and I looked right, and then my mum was sitting there at age 40 in an immaculate dress, shoes, hair. And she said to me, I want you to know I'm all right, David. That's all she said. And I've gone, Mum. And I sat with her and I held her hand. But that was it. But when I woke up in the morning, it was like, what happened? What has happened there, right? And for some reason, that had an impact on me. And I do honestly believe that she's with me, helping me along this thing. Because I stopped, which it's important to say that the amount I was drinking could be dangerous to stop. Yeah, I should have got medical help there, you know, but I didn't. I stopped. And I white-knuckled it until I went to this thing. But it made a difference. There was something that happened. It was like an epiphany to me. If you don't do something now, you're going to be joining her somewhere. Do you know what I mean? And it was like, I can't go on like this. I cannot carry on. And I stopped. And on paper, it looked like spontaneous sobriety, that I've just stopped, but it wasn't. I was telling myself for a long time I had to do something about it, like constantly every day. I cannot keep doing this. I've got to do something about it. And I just think it was the timing that happened that changed everything for me. Yeah.
And so you've got yourself sober.
Yeah.
Trauma, pain's happened.
Yeah.
How do you keep yourself sober, if you don't mind me asking?
Connection. Connection's a huge thing. I started connecting with the community, and I started holding events myself. I spoke at events, I appeared on podcasts, and then I developed my own podcast, which came completely out of the blue. I thought, you know what, I'm going to make my own podcast. And I recorded the first one, and it went to number 4 in the Apple charts. And it's
fantastic.
Like, wow. There's power here somewhere, you know, and I'm on the end of season 7 now. Brilliant. And they're life stories, and people love them because I don't say too much. A bit like this podcast, you know, you're allowing me to tell my story, you know, and people resonate with that. They identify to it, and they think, do you know what? I don't feel alone now, because I really understand what this person's saying, and they've got out of this. That means that there's a chance I can get out of it as well.
Absolutely.
You know, so there was that connection with the podcast. I've appeared on panels, different things like peppered around that. And then it's almost become my brand now, you know. It's like, I did a grey area drinking course, and now I'm a coach, and that's a whole new conversation, which is brilliant, because it's either before you either don't drink or you do drink and you're an alcoholic. There's a huge void in between of people that don't drink all the time. They might not drink a week but binge at the weekend. They might have 2 glasses of wine a night and stop at that. But when you say, well, just stop then, I don't want to do that. You know, that's a grey area drinker. And so I specialise in that as well. And that as well kind of removes the shame of the word alcoholic.
I think so.
A lot of people identify to that, and it works for them, but it doesn't work for me.
The term grey area drinking, I think, will catch a whole cohort of people who wouldn't associate with being an alcoholic, but would probably look to get advice on grey area drinking. I think it's a great, you know, I think most of life is in the grey. Most of life is not
absolutely.
black and white. You know, you may have actually found it easier to engage earlier on in your life in a grey area drinking, but where would you go? Like, if I'm honest, you know, you go back 10, 20 years, a grey area drinker, where would they go? What would they look at? What would they listen to? There's no podcasts, you know, there's no, you know, even the internet wasn't as developed then now. But I think it's a great resource to help equip people, because as you said, it wasn't just a moment, although you had that dream for a long time before. You were telling yourself, I have to stop this, I have to stop this. And we equip ourselves, don't we? And we do small things that help us on the right way. It's the steps.
It plants a seed. That's what it does. Right. So these conversations I have, you know, I might do a post, and then 3 months later, someone will say, that one post really hooked me into thinking that I've got a problem, and I'm now 6 weeks sober. You know what I mean? The power of the conversation is immense. And now we've got social media that we can use in the right way, is so powerful now. Because years ago it was AA, and that doesn't work for everyone. It works for some, but not everyone. And now there's lots of different groups around, and online communities and apps, and there's all sorts of things, you know. I've got a community in my app that's lovely, and we do a couple of Zooms a month that check in. Fantastic. And people hold on to that. I think, do you know what, I'm going to not drink till the next meeting, and you build it up, you know. Absolutely. It's amazing now. There's so much help out there now. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think, well, AA, I don't think will work for everyone, but the element they got right was the connection, the group work. But I think having multiple streams, like you say, that can plant seed. I'm the kind of person that seeds work. Yeah, I can hear something, but I don't like to move on things too quickly. I like to think about it. I like to analyse it. And plus, as you say, what I love what you said was I survived.
Yeah.
With my life, I look back, I survived. I did the best I could with how I was equipped to do it. And I'm delighted with where I've come out. So tell me, what's the future hold for you?
Well, it's the doors are open wide, you see, and that's when you stop drinking, you fling them open, and it's never a linear road. You know, I compare it to riding a bike. You get out there and it's sunny, and it's a straight road, and you're away, right? But then you go around the corner and there's a great big hill and it starts raining. It's like, what do? Do you chuck your bike in the bush and get an Uber back? No, you keep on pedaling, you know. So I'm open to what lays ahead. Is, you know, I believe in the strength of the universe. I've written one book. There might be another, I don't know. Fantastic. But whatever it looks like is a hell of a lot better than when I was drinking, believe me. That's all I can say really about that.
Of course. Tell me about the book.
Yeah, I wrote a book, and the irony of that was when I was drinking, I always used to say to my mates, throwaway comments like, I could write a book about this, you know, my hangovers and whatever. So it's a part memoir, which starts from the beginning about what I've talked about today. But it's also a self-help book because I'm a grey area drinking coach. So I go through different forms of recovery. I give resources, tips, tricks. And mainly motivation as well, because we all need to feel motivated. You know, with everything that's going on at the moment, there's a lot of doom and gloom around. You know, with all the fuel prices going up and all the interest rates, it's easy for someone to think, do you know what, it's not the right time, so I carry on drinking. So I motivate people to try and reframe the conversation.
Yeah, very good.
And just see it slightly differently. And you only have to tweak it sometimes to take you off at a different direction. And so hopefully by the time they put the book down and it's read, they go, do you know what? I'm going to give it a go. And that's the aim for the book. And so far, it's only been out a few weeks, but it's got a lot of 5-star reviews. And
fantastic.
Yeah.
What's it called again?
One for the Road.
One for the Road.
Which is the same as the podcast.
Yeah, very good. Very good. And so, I mean, just to kind of end on that, I think you've got this reframing that you mentioned. And I think when I hear about your journey, you reframed everything really for your advantage, even as you said bye to your mum, even as you go forward to your sobriety. What happened. And I've now reframed these to positive elements in my life that give you resilience and strength. And, you know, I think that's very inspiring. And you are motivating, you are inspiring. And thank you so much for sharing your journey so honestly with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for asking me.
Perfect. Thank you.